And I know that most of you are likely aware that inequality has definitely been getting worse, economic inequality for sure, in the United States in recent years. I'm picking this topic and focusing on it with you for the next few minutes because it is really reaching crisis proportions, levels of inequality without historical precedent, provocative of the worst kind of bitterness, splitting, injustice you could imagine. And so I need to focus all of us on it. Two recent events brought this home to me. And I think they are both signs of the social corruption that these levels of inequality are producing, as extreme inequality has often produced real problems in the past.
Richard Wolff emphasizes that inequality is not an accident, but a predictable outcome of the way modern capitalism functions.
You know, the Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, years ago, made a statement that became famous. It goes roughly like this: you can't have in modern societies, he wrote, a combination of inequality and democracy. If you have inequality, you're going to lose your democracy. Or to put it the other way, if you want real democracy, you're going to have to do away with inequality. Well, he said it. People knew he was on to something, but nobody since then in charge of this country's economic life has done anything about it. And let me make that clear by looking at where we are today, the culmination of what was and was not done in the past.
In his view, the crisis we face today is not just about numbers on income charts or statistics on wealth gaps.
So I begin with two things that provoked me. The first was the offer made by the board of directors of a capitalist corporation, one of the largest in the world, the Tesla Corporation, the one that makes the famous electric vehicles. They offered to their own CEO, who is, I believe, a member of their board as well, an unprecedented pay package over the next 10 years, amounting to $1 trillion. No one has ever been paid that amount of money over a 10-year period as a corporate leader. Mr. Musk is already well known because he's already the richest CEO in the world, whose personal wealth is estimated in the range of $300 to $450 billion. In other words, this unprecedented peak salary, more than ever given to a CEO before, shows you that politics and economics in modern capitalism have reached this point.
It is about the very structure of the system, which consistently channels resources upward and leaves the majority with less security, less power, and fewer opportunities.
We get a stark illustration that capitalism is a system that makes the rich richer and the rest of us not so much. Think about it. $1 trillion for Mr. Musk is more money than is spent by the United States, I was about to say Defense Department, but Mr. Trump has changed it to the War Department. $1 trillion is more than their annual budget this year. And the United States is famous around the world for spending more money on the military than any other country in the world by an enormous margin. And of course, that includes Russia, China, and any of the other countries that are referred to as adversaries.
He explains that inequality grows when productivity increases but wages remain stagnant.
This is obscene. Giving the richest man on earth the richest pay package for the next few years makes a horrible joke for the people who aren't laughing. You know, the majority of the people in the world, the majority of the people in the United States who are having an ever harder time making ends meet. Mr. Musk wouldn't know anything about that with the wealth he has. If he didn't ever get another nickel in his life, he'd still be the richest person in the world. But instead of using $1 trillion to help the masses of the people in this world who could be helped a lot by $1 trillion, we're not going to do it. We're not going to help them. We're going to allow a corporation to take, $1 trillion worth of wealth and give it to the richest man.
Workers create more wealth, yet the rewards are captured almost entirely by employers, shareholders, and executives.
It really takes your breath away, and it should. The second thing that caught my eye was the U.S. Labor Department's, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, revised the last year's 12 months of data about job creation and basically told us that it was a mistake, that somewhere between 500,000 and 1,000,000 jobs we were told had been created and filled by Americans hadn't been. It was a mistake. A few days ago, Mr. Trump fired the recent head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Will he fire the one he put in her place? Is he not happy with the numbers? I'm not. You know why? Because over the last year, if you've paid attention to financial reporting, here was the number one story repeated over and over again.
This widening gap is not only unfair, but dangerous. It undermines trust in institutions, fuels resentment, and creates the conditions for social unrest.
The American people must be ignorant. The American people must be poorly informed. Why? Because the American people were saying to every pollster who bothered to ask that the economy was not good and their economic situation is lousy. Over the last week, the Gallup poll showed that 75% of the American people polled think their economic future is not as good as their present. Things are not good and getting worse. But no, over the last year, we were told, the economists know, the business leaders, they were congratulating each other over $100 dinners about how good the economy was. No, it wasn't, many of us said. Oh, yes, it was. The mass of people are somehow not understanding how good they have it. Oh, yes, they did. You, the leaders of this system, were the ones fooling yourself, maybe imagining you were fooling the rest of us, but you didn't.
For Wolff, this means that governments often protect corporate profits rather than the needs of ordinary citizens.
A whole bunch, not just me, a whole bunch of economists and others were critical. They weren't given much play. The media are owned by the very rich people who need to keep this celebration going. But the fact of the matter is, we live in an economic system that produces and reproduces inequality. The top 0.5% of America's people own half the wealth in the country. The top 10% own 80% of all the shares of stocks and bonds. The mass of our people, the majority of our people, are having a very hard time that's getting harder. And that's obscene. What Hitler did to Jews and gypsies and communists and socialists was not new. It was the repeat of what had been done by Germans, but also by lots of other Europeans all over the world. The first book I ever wrote as a young man was a study of British colonialism in Kenya, in which I studied what the British did from the time they arrived to the time that an uprising of the African people there, known in the world as the Mau Mau Revolution, drove them out. And you see that everywhere in the world. The last century and a half have been and will be in the future called the era of anti-colonialism. It's the overwhelming story of the overwhelming majority of the people on this planet. India, which was a formal colony, China, which was half a colony, and so on. What Israel is trying to do is to go against a century and a half of historical movement in the opposite direction, to undo settler colonialism, to apologize for settler colonialism, whether it's the Maori in New Zealand or the indigenous people in Australia or the Africans in South Africa, and you could go on. This is hopeless. And this has nothing to do with the particulars. You can't do now what you could do 2 centuries ago, especially if the intervening period has been an era of anti-colonialism. So what Israel has done, not willing to give up that project, and let's remember, it was British colonialism that created this opportunity for Jews escaping Europe. What Israel has done is hooked itself up to the biggest, toughest military in the world, the United States, and basically made a decision to become the military outpost of the remaining empire, the U.S. empire. And this meant it was the flashpoint for everything against all of that. And most, of course, immediately in the Arab countries that surround Israel and the larger Muslim world which surrounds Israel. And what we have seen and what we're watching today is the slow, painful, but inevitable process of teaching the Israelis that this is not going to work. Now, for a while, it can. For a while, it may continue. They have enormous commitment to military everything. And they have the endless provision of the means coming from the United States. That is their alliance. And Israel has worked very hard to support the political forces in the United States to support that alliance for obvious reasons. But it can't work. That's why the conflict never stops. The Palestinians have demonstrated that even under genocidal oppression, they're not leaving. That's incredible, given what they have suffered. They're not leaving. And they have appealed to their Arab and Islamic brothers and sisters to support them and to become problems for Israel, which those others have become. Not just Hamas, but Hezbollah, but on, and I won't rehearse it all. We all have been living through it. Eventually, they would overcome what had been their long-term good luck. That the Arab countries, and this is no credit to them either, that the Arab countries were afraid. Anyone who pushed back too much against Israel would get bombed, would get missiled, would get overthrown, and would incur the risk that the United States would help. And they didn't trust each other. And so every now and then, one of them would make a deal with Israel to be allowed to do something that the others might not be. Not a pretty picture. But eventually, the Arab countries figured all this out. If I can understand it, so can they. And they realized we have to come up with one of us that can show the Israelis why and how we're willing to fight back. And they found two. The first one is this mysterious group referred to in the American media as the Houthis. The Houthis is a part of the population of Yemen, one of the poorest countries on earth, basically a sliver of inhabitable land in an otherwise desert over there. People who very frugal, very hardworking, able to live on next to nothing. And slowly it became clear they are located where they can stop shipping in an important part of the world economy, and they can shoot missiles into Israel. And nobody can stop them. The United States tried. Earlier this year, a month of steady, heavy bombing by the United States had no effect. Oh yes, we killed a few people. We broke a few buildings. Couldn't stop it. Can't stop it now. The second was Iran. Iran is a supporter of Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, fill in the blank. And why? Because it is too big and too powerful and too well connected for the Israelis to dare. And what did the Israelis do? What in a way they had to do. I'm not excusing them. I'm trying to understand their logic. They had to show that they would do what everybody was counting on them to be smart enough not to do. So they attacked Iran. The Jewish part of Israel is 7 million people. Iran has 90 million people. You don't do that. You don't attack a country of 90 million with 7 million. And you sure don't do it while you're busy fighting a war in Gaza, which the whole world condemns you for. And Iran has very close relations with Russia and very good relations with China. What are you doing? The act was an act of desperation. The hope of Mr. Netanyahu, obvious to those who follow, was to draw the United States in. And Mr. Trump, when he listened apparently to Mr. Netanyahu and didn't listen to all the voices, including inside the Republican Party, that said don't do that, did it. Whereupon Mr. Trump discovered that what he had unleashed was a conflict between Israel and Iran that almost everyone other than the American media, who are useless in this situation in a way that exceeds bias and exceeds jingoism. This is straight out propagandistic nonsense. Everyone else in the world realizes that the supports Iran has in its own country and its border with Russia and its treaties with Russia and its support from China versus Israel is a slam dunk of the worst sort. It's not a sustainable arrangement. And so we now see the backtracking of a desperate Trump who has to try to call off what he just turned on. Yes, he's a herky-jerky leader. Everyone knows that now. He displays that all the time. But that should not obscure us. What we're seeing here is the herky-jerky behavior of someone who's trapped